And good morning to one and all. Dolomena. I wish to thank the people of Vuda for the traditional welcome ceremony that was accorded to us in the chiefly village of Viseisei, the staff of the ministry and the divisional officers and the head teachers throughout Fiji. Your representatives were also there this morning. I wish to thank Ratu Iloilovatu again for the honor to have this traditional welcome ceremony by the people of this chiefly village of Viseisei. And we know that this hall is named after the previous Vuda, who was the Chancellor of the University of Fiji. Today I want to speak about the topics that reflect the changes that have occurred in the Ministry of Education in the period that I've been there this time around. That's from year 2008 to now, 2013. 5 years going on to 6 years now. Speak of some of the major changes, some of the reasons why these changes had to be taken, and some examples of these major changes in the education system, and to say that in the end, that education reform continues even after this year, as it has happened in the past, including some constitutional requirements that have changed the way that we are going to look at education and administer education from the 1st of January 2014. In broad headings, more than 70 initiatives were taken by the Ministry of Education under the leadership of the current Permanent Secretary during the period 2008 through now in the various sections of the ministry, from early childhood education to tertiary education. And these changes have involved basic changes in our education system, including, for example, the rise in the number of ECE institutions, or early childhood institutions, or kindergartens, the restructuring of the school system, the abolition of examinations, the free supply of textbooks, the assistance in transport of students to their schools and back, the student vouchers for meals, and introduction of new subjects in schools and so on. There are so many of them, and as I said, there are more than 70 initiatives have been taken. And in what follows in this address, I've tried to rationalize these changes by drawing on the reasons for these basic changes and samples of the changes in early childhood education, in primary education, in secondary schools, and throughout tertiary education institutions. The prescriptions for education in this period, that's 5 years, as I said, going on to 6 now, is contained in the People's Charter. Most of you are aware of the Charter. People's Charter for Change, Peace and Progress, and the Roadmap for Democracy and Sustainable Socio-Economic Development from 2009 to 2014. Some of the members of this forum, people from the universities that we have, took part in the formulation of those two documents at the beginning of the current government. And what happened when these were drawn up? It was seen that the education system that we've taken, that have seen us through to that time, needed to change to ensure two things. One, that education was made available to all children in Fiji. And secondly, that education was relevant to the students' aspirations. Those are the basic tenets upon which these changes took place or have taken place. To do those two things, A and B, that I have said, has meant bringing about consequential changes in the structure of the education system from kindergarten to tertiary levels and the contents of the curriculum offered at different levels of education. You had teachers know very well the changes I'm talking about and the changes that your education officers have often in the last 5 years discussed with you in what you teach in the schools. Some structural changes in the early childhood, structural and content changes in early childhood education including the growing recognition by the state of the importance of early childhood education. It's shown by the state's commitment in the training of ECE teachers. 989 teachers today are now teaching in kindergartens. The payment of the salary grants for ECE teachers, the government budgeted 3.3 million grant for this purpose, the supply of education materials and growth in the number of the enrollment in the kindergartens. There are about 783 ECE centers and about 16,000 children enrolled in kindergartens. Structurally, the increasing involvement by the state in early childhood education has meant the physical extension downward of primary schools to include kindergartens, as well as the responsibility of their head teachers. I didn't tell you that because those of you who have kindergartens appended to your school know what I'm talking about very well. So much for that. In the primary education area, the establishment of infant schools in strategically located areas. 2 have been completed by today, and 4 are on the drawing board for construction next year. The idea behind the infant schools, establishment of infant schools, is to stop young children aged 6.5 or 5.5 to 8 from boarding in sometimes very ill-equipped primary school boarding facilities. Structurally, these infant schools are parts of existing primary schools. But where they exist, they make the pursuit of education easier, therefore making them available, more comfortable and convenient to both children and their parents. Another change in the primary area is the return of Forms 1 and 2 to primary schools. Affects both primary and secondary schools. Some of you know this very well because they have affected you, and it's consistent with the new nomenclature that will bring about at the beginning of next year for classes and forms to come into use early next year. The introduction of the new nomenclature for each level of schooling from year 1, which is equivalent to class 1 now, to year 8, equivalent to class 8 now. In primary, in year 9, equivalent to Form 3 now, to year 13, equivalent to Form 4 in secondary schools, to recognize the 13-year education system which the state will fund for every Fijian child, will commence in 2014 January, as I said. Briefly, in the secondary, a new nomenclature, year 9 to year 13, will apply from 2014. And primary schools, students need to complete the primary school syllabus. I know the permanent secretary and his staff, they've been trying to explain to principals of secondary schools and managers of secondary schools to shed the class 7, the Form 1 and 2 back to the primary schools. They're having some success in that, but it's not an easy job. And I know you will suspect the reason why they can't give that up quickly. But I'm convinced that students need to complete the primary school syllabus properly, taught by primary teachers. We can't have primary year 7 and year 8 children pursuing year 9 and year 10, year 9, year 10 and year 11 secondary school syllabi. Year 9 and 11, as you know very well, are very important preparatory years for external examinations taken in year 12 and year 13 in our secondary schools. The remaining 2 exams are taken at the time, and students need to be grounded properly for these from year 9 onward. Another change, it will ensure the structure will ensure the automatic inflow of primary children to secondary schools and for those who qualify to tertiary education institutions. Form 4 is no longer, as you know, a terminal year. That's the reason why the structure changed. We've taken away the examination that used to happen at that level. We also have now the registration board. Many of us who qualified as teachers a long time ago didn't know what this was when it came into being. But people who come into your school, and I hope that you teachers are adhering and exercising these rules. Our schools used to be quite open to any Tom, Dick and Harry who wants to teach anything to come to our school. It is not legal these days. They are required to be registered to come and teach even their religion in the school. So we read this FTRB, as you all know, are required to, the FTRB is required to register all teachers and all types of practitioners who come into our schools. Teaching is for the professionals. And schools become a place of learning where children and students are not afraid to pursue their aspirations. In tertiary education, we've seen the establishment of the Fiji Higher Education Commission to monitor and regulate higher education institutions in Fiji. The establishment of the Fiji National University through the merger of existing tertiary institutions, the Fiji School of Medicine, the Fiji School of Nursing, the College of Higher Education that used to be at Nasinu, the Lautoka Teachers College, and the Fiji College of Agriculture, the Fiji Institution of Technology have been fused together to form the Fiji National University. The aim is to train human resources needed for Fiji's development from basic to the highest level and offer these to all Fijians who qualify. Over 40 campuses have been established by the Fiji National University throughout Fiji, have been established and are making this level of education accessible throughout Fiji. What are some of the changes in the contents of the curriculum? One is that the dislocation in the educational progress of children that used to occur in the primary education system in classes 6 and 8 and students in Form 4 had to be addressed to allow unrestricted passage of children to reach the highest level of education and accomplish the directives of the structural changes. Included in these changes, including the abolition of the examination in primary schools. As I said, the Fiji Intermediate Examination that most of you are familiar about or familiar of, the Fiji Intermediate Examination at Class 6 and the Fiji ATA exam at Class 8. and in secondary schools, Form 4 Fiji Junior Certificate Examination. Because these were hurdles. They were hurdles for your children to get over, or blockages in the education system that push children, the children and students out of the school system. This resulted in 2 external public examinations left in the school system now. The Fiji School Living Certificate, as you know, taken at the end of Form 6, and Form 7 certificate examination at the end of Form 7. The result is that a system that took in children and students and then progressively dropped them out of the system to the tune of 60% by Form 4 had to be looked at and ended. The Fiji National Curriculum Framework, FNCF, curriculum contents of subjects also had to be changed to include relevant and job-related contents. I have approved the syllabi for Year 1 to Year 4, Year 9, and a few subjects in Year 11, economics, history, and physics. The balance of the subjects are on the drawing board for completion. There will also be new revised student learning record at all levels from Year 1 to Year 10. New subjects had to be introduced. Examples, TVET in the secondary schools. We had made good progress in this. There were 124 in 2 years. Secondary schools have been made to take TVET examination. And in primary school, the intensified introduction of the computer education in both primary and secondary. The importance of computer is in the area of e-learning in secondary schools, and OLPC, that's the 1 laptop per child in primary schools. Tomorrow, I'm launching OLPC in one school in the middle of this island, at Nandarivatu Primary School in the center of Vitilegu. The new education measurement systems also had to be introduced in both primary and secondary schools. Internal assessments of various forms, have now been used. As I said, that these education changes will continue. Most basic change in the inclusion, in the most basic changes that have taken place only recently in the inclusion in the Constitution of provisions for education. This makes education a constitutional right of all Fijians and makes education a legal responsibility of the state. Following is a quote from Section 31. If you haven't read the Constitution, read it. Section 31 of the Constitution states the right to education. Section 31, every person has the right to early childhood education. B, primary and secondary education. And C, further education. That's now available as a constitutional right of every Fijian child in Fiji. Secondly, Section 31(2) says the state must take reasonable measure within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of this right. If you have time, you can ask the PSC, when his deputies are here, mix around with them, and ask them. They've been working on free education coming as next year. But whether it's going to come, it's going to depend on the exercise that the Permanent Secretary of Education is doing currently, and his staff in the Ministry of Education, together with the Ministry of Finance. As I said, Section 2, the state must take reasonable measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of A, free early childhood, free primary school, free secondary, and free further education in Fiji. Too bad you missed the boat. Your children is going to benefit from this. And B, to education for persons who are unable to complete their primary, secondary education. This might include some of us. And also the Constitution requires that conversational and contemporary Itoke and Fiji Hindi languages shall be taught as compulsory subjects in all primary schools. I'm afraid we won't have any more excuses, because when we've tried to do this in the past, we were told we have no teachers. Indian teachers, Fijian teachers can't teach their language in the schools. That's not going to apply anymore, because this now become a legal responsibility that the Permanent Secretary, with me, and all the education officers in the districts are responsible for on behalf of the state. And the state may direct any educational institution to teach subjects pertaining to health, to civic education, and issues of national interest. And any educational institution must comply with any such directions made by the state. 5, Section 31(5), in applying any right under this section, if the state claims that it does not have the resources to implement the right, it is the responsibility of the state to show that the resources are not available. A major change in the administration of education, it's still in the same section, it appears in another section, provided in the Constitution, is the transfer of powers to the Permanent Secretary and the minister responsible from the current authorities, Section 127 and its following subsections are relevant. Subsection 3 of that section states that the Permanent Secretary of a ministry is responsible to the minister concerned for the efficient, effective, and economical management of the ministry or any department under the ministry. And if you say that that's no different from what we have at the moment, listen to this. The Permanent Secretary of which ministry shall have the authority to appoint, to remove, and institute disciplinary action against all staff of the ministry with the agreement of the minister responsible for the ministry. I don't see any clap for that. The Permanent Secretary of which ministry, with the agreement of the minister responsible for the ministry, has the authority to determine all matters pertaining to the employment of all staff in the ministry, including the terms and conditions of employment, the qualification requirements for appointment, and the process to be followed for appointment, which must be an open, transparent, and competitive selection process based on merit. And C, the salaries, the benefits, the allowances payable in accordance with the budget as approved by Parliament. And D, the total establishment of the total number of staff that are required to be appointed in accordance with the budget approved by Parliament. I want us to note that the rights envisioned by the constitutions are basic rights, which the state is responsible for and must ensure for all Fijians. It is our responsibility in the ministry, from the minister to the most junior staff, to see that the constitutional requirements for education are put into practice and achieved. Because education is basically a preparation for life, and life is a continually changing target, change and reforms in education is and must be a continuous process, reflecting life's changing needs. This is the prescription for all of us here, teachers, minister, officers of the ministry, for all of us here in this conference, beginning from today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.